In my last video I went over what to do when going first, and it begs the question, if my opponent can set up enough interruptions to stop anything I try to do, then what do I do? How can I play through 7 interruptions? You have 2 options, stopping that board from happening in the first place or breaking the board. Some decks are inherently better at going second. Something like Crusadia can end up on a big boss monster that could be very difficult to out or end up on a negate. But when they go second, they can quite easily deal 8000 damage in one attack, and it's usually played as such. Decks that are specialized for going second are usually referred to as OTK, as they focus on winning on that very same turn. That last point is very important, as your opponent can always come back as long as they're still in the game, and Yugioh has plenty of powerful cards that can start an entire combo by themselves. So if you can't OTK, you're better off clearing the field and setting up interruptions for the next turn. So how do we stop those strong boards from being made? We have to play hand traps. Hand traps is a term we use to refer to cards that you can use from your hand to interrupt your opponent during their first turn. The thing is, a well-placed hand trap can stop an entire combo in its tracks, and if it doesn't, you'll usually force your opponent to end on a suboptimal board. If you want to play more in Yugioh, you have to play hand traps, as decks don't have to be meta to set up very strong boards. Also, it goes without saying that if you go first, you can see hand traps as additional interruptions for the next turn, as cards like Ash Blossom don't have any restrictions on them. Now I'm going to go over some commonly played hand traps in Master Duel, as of the time of recording. Starting with Max C. You can send Max C to the graveyard, and for the rest of his turn, every time your opponent special summons, you draw 1 card immediately. Now it doesn't matter what side of the Ban Max C debate you are. We can agree that Max C is one of, if not the strongest card in the game, as it allows you to gain insane advantage if you resolve it, as Max C lets you go neutral in card advantage if you use it in response to an effect that special summons, and from there, every single special summon is advantageous. This means 3 things. You either draw into more hand traps that you can use to interrupt your opponent and stop their plays, you draw into strong going second tools to break the board your opponent is making, or you draw into your combo pieces and extenders, giving you enough fuel to play through whatever your opponent sets up. So it makes your opponent make a decision. Do they give you more cards to set up something decent and risk you drawing into those strong hand traps or going second cards? Or do they end up their turn and hope that whatever hand traps they have are sufficient and they don't lose the next turn? This effect is so strong that players would usually choose to end their turn just so that you don't get card advantage, especially if their deck needs a lot of summons to put something meaningful on the field, and making your opponent skip their turn is the strongest kind of effect that you can get. Also, there's nothing stopping you from activating Max C with a board full of negates. Max C warps the meta around it, as most players will play Max C and play the counters to Max C, dedicating almost a quarter of their deck to that. Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring is one of those counters, as you can discard this card to negate an effect that moves a card from the deck. Ash Blossom is one of those cards that you will see often, and for a good reason, as most decks will search something from the deck at some point. As with all hand traps, how strong they are depends on the meta. Currently, in a tier limits meta is not as good as it used to be, but it's still a pretty good option to consider, not only to negate the Max C, but against decks like Branded, where Ash in their Branded fusion can weaken their end board significantly. Infinite Impermanence is one of the best trap cards in the game, precisely because you can activate it from your hand if you control no cards, and allows you to target one monster on your opponent's field and negate it. It also has a bonus effect. If this card was set before the activation, the effects of spell or trap cards in that column are negated, so it can catch a player by surprise if they were not paying attention. Effect Veiler is a level 1 tuner that on your opponent's main phase you can set it from your hand to the graveyard to target one effect monster your opponent controls and negate it. It's kinda like Impermanence, better in some cases and worse in others. You can use it without problems during your opponent's turn, the only condition is, it has to be the main phase. So unlike Impermanence, if your opponent gives you an Evil or you resolve a Gamma, you can still use Veiler, but it can only be used during your opponent's turn. So if you top deck a Veiler, it's doing nothing, but if you draw an Impermanence, you can use it to start breaking their board. Frame Gear Gamma can be used as long as you control no monsters, and allows you to negate a monster effect and destroy it. Gamma has an advantage over cards like Ash Blossom and Impermanence, and it's that you destroy the card that you negate. so it doubles as removal, denying your opponent from extra deck materials. It requires you to have a driver in your decklist though, a card that you definitely don't want to draw. Ghost Veil and Haunted Mansion is just like Ash Blossom but for the graveyard, being a better option than Ash currently as there's a lot of graveyard effects in the meta, not only because of Tearlaments but also because of the Ichizu cards. Nibiru the Primal Being can be activated during the main phase if your opponent summons 5 or more monsters this turn. In that case, you tribute as many face-up monsters on the field as possible to summon him to your side of the field, while giving your opponent a token with the cumulative stats of the cards tributed. Nibiru is non-targeting, non-destruction removal for the entire field, a full field wipe against combo-heavy decks. Currently, it has fallen off from most decks as Tearlaments can set up a negate before their 5th summon, and a Sprite deck makes it impossible for Nibiru to be summoned. You can still take those decks by surprise, as some people may do combos differently to play around cards like the Shizu Millers, leaving themselves open for a Nibiru use before they can get the negate out. Dimension Shifter is a very strong hand trap currently if you can play it. If you have no cards in your graveyard, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, and until the end of the next turn, everything sent to the graveyard is banished instead. This card straight up wins games. It's pretty common to use the graveyard as a resource, and this card stops that for 2 turns. Some decks can't even function without their graveyard. This effect affects you too, so have this in mind while you build your deck. You can discard Diddy Crow to target 1 card in your opponent's graveyard and banish it. Diddy Crow is a card that started showing up out of nowhere once Tearlaments were added to the game. Tearlaments is a deck that focuses on fusion summoning using the graveyard. Merely having its Unshading place themselves on the bottom of the deck along with other materials from the hand, field or graveyard to fusion summon. The card that triggers the fusion has to be used as material, and in most cases those effects to fusion summon can be chain link blocked, which stops Ghost Veil from negating them. But Diddy Crow doesn't have to be chained in response to them, it lets you target them merely the Happiness or the Sharing in the graveyard. By banishing them before they can fusion summon, you stop the fusion summon entirely, as you're getting rid of the card that has to be used as material. You can also use Diddy Crow to banish the tier boss monsters and stop them from coming back. And that's for the Tearlament matchup. If your opponent uses a card that targets something in their graveyard, like a Monster Reborn or a Branded in Red, you can banish that target, making it resolve without an effect. You can also banish cards in their graveyard before they have a chance to activate their effects, like with Branded Opening, stopping it from protecting their monsters. Even though this card isn't a negate, it's still a good form of interruption, especially in a meta with a lot of graveyard effects like the current one. By the way, chain link blocking, dodging effects and cards resolving without an effect will get their own video later. And that's it for hand traps. If you have any questions or if I forgot anything, let me know in the comments below.